All right. Well, first of all, welcome everyone to our October CAN meeting. I'm Ann Coffey, the CEO of CNPE, which is the coordinating host of CAN. And so we thank you for being with us today. Your presence is really important, and it's helping us stay connected, deepening our understanding of what is happening in our community and learning together. CAN is a forum for nonprofit social impact leaders, volunteers, and funders to hear about the most pressing issues and needs of our community. You will hear from leaders across the region and experts from the field. It's a place to learn about substantive issues that impact our work and our community in deep ways. Since our meeting in September, we hosted 2 listening sessions with CAN participants to better understand how CAN sessions themselves might be improved and how we might better inspire action and how we can better share the actions that folks are taking. I want to thank those who joined us for those discussions. It's really helpful to hear what people liked about the format, future topics, and so forth. We're going to wrap up this year with hearing from other groups about how they experience public safety, people with disability, women, children, LGBTQ, and others. And we'll be sending out that program information soon. We'll also be sharing more about the 2022 focus in early December. But in the meantime, if you have ideas and we're not able to join us, please share those, put those in the chat, or if you want to reach out to any one of the co-hosts, please do that. We would really love to hear from you. As a reminder, we will be recording the program portion of these sessions. The report out and discussion portion will not be recorded. And we ask that everyone stay on mute. But that doesn't mean don't share your comments and questions. Please talk to the panelists through the chat. Light it up. Let us know what you're thinking and feeling. And as you may know, CNPE is committed to ensuring that our programming reflects the diversity of organizations in our community and the people in them. To make sure we understand who is here, we'll put up a quick poll so you can tell us. The key data will help us to develop an understanding of which voices we are attracting and perhaps more importantly, which voices we are not. And rest assured, the poll is anonymous and any reporting using this data will be in the aggregate only and will not contain any personal identifiable information. It only takes about 20 or 30 seconds. So Merv, I'm going to ask you to put up a quick poll. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Darryl Young, or as some of us call him, Colonel Young, our facilitator for this discussion. Mr. Young currently serves as the executive director of the Coalition Supporting Young Adults, where he is tasked with supporting Louisville's opportunity youth, young people 16 to 24, who are not connected to school, work, or services. He is an active member of the Louisville community as a youth advocate and community organizer. Mr. Young has been heavily involved in Cities United initiative and the National Black Male Achievement Movement. He is the past president and co-founder of the Associate Board of Directors of the Nativity Academy of St. Boniface, former co-chair of the One Love Louisville initiative and a senior consultant with the Racial Healing Project. He is a former member of the grassroots community organization, Network Center for Community Change, and he is a 2020 Louisville Business First 40 Under 40 honoree. And he is a Kentucky Colonel and proud alum of the University of Louisville class of 2012, where he received a bachelor's degree in secondary education. So let's lift this man up and thank him for his dedication to our community. Darryl, thank you for being here. We're going to turn it over to you to introduce our guests and to facilitate this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ann. Really appreciate it. So happy to be here. When Anthony Smith reached out to me, I couldn't say yes fast enough to have this conversation and to be in space with these amazing young people who I always lift up and tell people that we need to be listening to at the forefront and not at the back end. So I'm just really happy that the Center for Nonprofit Excellence decided to lift up this conversation. I think it's a really much needed conversation as we talk about public safety from a youth perspective. So I have the honor and privilege of moderating this panel with our panelists this morning, Imani Smith, Jailen Leavell, and Kenneth, Rhodes. So happy and thankful to have you all with us this morning. Really appreciate you guys taking the time out for us to have this conversation. So I want to go ahead and jump right into our very first question. So we're talking about public safety, and I want to know, when you hear that term public safety, what is your personal vision for public safety? How do you define it? And I also want to know, from a youth perspective, do you feel like your definition is in line with what other people think of when they hear public safety? And we can start, I'll start with Imani.
I was not expecting to go first. That's okay. Good morning, everyone, by the way. Just to answer the question, I want to come at it from a lens of, it might sound a little more philosophical, but I truly do believe that whenever we're talking about public safety, whenever we're talking about reimagining public safety, so all the conversations that I know that all of us were engaged in last year through this year, coming off of everything that happened in Louisville, it's really important, at least for me, to center it with thinking about what does a vision for the beloved community looks like. So if you're familiar with the concept of beloved community, that comes from Reverend Martin Luther King, in which he talks about really having a community that celebrates diversity, that celebrates, all the ways that we show up as ourselves, but then that also looks at, how do we keep our community safe? How do we make sure that everyone is accounted for? How do we make sure that everyone is accountable? And public safety comes in to that junction with looking at what does transparency and inclusivity and prioritizing communities that are usually not paid attention to. It looks like centering mental health and trauma response. When you look at the budget for what public safety, especially in Louisville, looks like, there's a lot of reallocation that needs to happen to just community services, to just prioritizing what people go through daily and making sure that people are whole and that people are living in this city, living in Louisville. Not in Louisville right now, I'm in Danville, but living in Louisville whole, and having everything they need. So in full honesty, I think that looks very different to what we experience right now, with all the pain and violence that is associated and comes from public safety. But I think that is the best way for us to reimagine it and to look at it going forward.
Thank you, Imani, for that thoughtful response. Kenneth.
Yes, thank you. Really, really excited to be a part of this conversation. I definitely agree with what Imani said. I know my personal experience with public safety in Louisville, Kentucky has not been a good one. So when you ask me to define it, I struggle with it because I've had to sort of just survive the everyday struggle of feeling unsafe, of having no public safety, in my opinion. So for me, like Imani said, I think we need to continue to prioritize the fact that we have to reimagine this thing, and that what we are calling public safety is not public safety. There are so many factors when it comes to it. It's so much more than just increased police presence. So my vision is literally the complete opposite of what we define it as today. And I really would just enjoy being able to live my life, being able to travel my community safely, being able to navigate workspaces, just different spaces safely, without being profiled, without feeling like this stop can be my last chance of being free or being alive. So again, that's my definition, because my lived experience, I can tell you everything they're doing wrong, and everything that truly does need to change. I may not be able to tell you what we need, but I can tell you what we don't need. So yeah, I'll stop there and I'll let the other panelists speak.
Appreciate that, Kenneth. And then Jailen, if you want to come on.
Yeah, certainly. Good stuff from both of you all. Good morning, everyone. I think, when we talk about public safety, it's important to identify the framework and who's safe. How are we identifying who's safe in these communities? And I think Kenneth kind of was alluding to that. Specifically in Louisville, you can ask someone in the West End, what's public safety to you? And ask someone that grew up in the East End, what's public safety to you? Specifically for myself, growing up West End, born and raised my entire life, public safety, it's not a norm. It's not a buzzword that you hear in the community. Essentially when you think you would see LMPD or someone, you would be safe, but ultimately that brings a fear. It's the exact opposite of what you would think. So I think it's, when we talk about reimagining and how we define it, I think it's from a structure perspective. Just growing up, you're taught to know, oh, the police, that's bad, or I'm gonna call the police on you, or in school, we're gonna send the police to, just restructuring that framework and how we look at law enforcement and how we perceive the government and authority. So I think it's just changing that topic centered around public safety and reimagining it. Personally, as I grew older, you form these relationships with law enforcement and different authorities, and you're able to formulate your own opinion. But, growing up as a kid, you didn't feel safe when you saw law enforcement, specifically in Louisville.
Appreciate that perspective, Jailen. One thing I'm really hearing is that too much of what we think of as public safety is only rooted in policing, right? And in surveillance and punitive measures. And that from what you're all are saying is that we need to really think, about factors outside of just that for people to feel safe. There are more things that need to be considered for folks to feel safe, right? So in asking that question, I kind of want to expound on that, is what are those things that need to be applied to this idea of reimagining public safety? I think, Kenneth, you mentioned you could tell, what we don't need to think about, but I want to hear, what do we need to think about, right? In terms of what makes people feel safe, what will make, everybody in community, not just certain segments, but all folks in community feel safe. And also too, I really appreciate that real nice introduction and bio you got to hear about me, but I would love for you guys, when you answer this question, to just tell us, where you're coming from, right? We didn't get to hear about some of the amazing work that you all are lifting up. So just tell us a little briefly about what you do and your background when you answer that question. So again, really want to know, what do we need to make sure we address in public safety outside of just policing? And this time, I'm going to start with Kenneth.
Thank you, Darryl. So again, Kenneth Rhodes here. I'm part of the Cities United team here in Louisville, Kentucky. I was brought on the team earlier this year. So again, I'm in the fight of just creating a safe world for Black men and boys. And that's something that every day I wake up, I take very serious. So to answer your question, I believe we need to focus less, of course, on funding of police, increasing of police presence, and more so root causes. You need to understand that these neighborhoods that you put these people in are, a huge factor of why, of why the environment is the way it is. You can't cage an animal pretty much and not expect it to react. You can't have people in neighborhoods and environments that lack resources, lack opportunity, and penalize them when they try and figure out ways to feed their family and ways to advance their life. I just think, again, we truly need to focus on the root causes, which to me, when you look at these neighborhoods, like Jailen said, you can look at the West End and you can look at the East End. And if you don't see that as problematic, then again, I think you're just lying to yourself and you don't want to reimagine anything pretty much. So I think we really just need to focus on just the structure of these neighborhoods and being intentional on providing resources, providing opportunities so that our youth and the community itself can thrive and have opportunity. So that's my thoughts on that.
Thanks, Kenneth. Jailen?
Yeah, definitely. Good stuff. So yeah, Jailen Leavell, born and raised Louisville, Kentucky. I was a fellow with Cities United cohort last year. Also worked with Youth Violence Prevention Center at U of L, a lot of other work. Just graduated in May, moved to Jackson, Mississippi, 90 days in my career. It's a struggle, but I'm getting through it. I'm in Jackson, Mississippi now, working as a reporter for the CBS affiliate here. So just, think about me, keep me uplifted in whatever way you do. Just adulting, it's real, and it's definitely been an experience. But I'm loving it. Anyway, to the conversation, I think it starts with investment. You have to invest in these communities. West Louisville specifically, there is a lack of investment and trust. You have to be at the table, and it's not by inviting them to town halls or having prayer walks in the community. You certainly need to, bring these people into the table. Obviously, when you're invested in something, you feel like you're a part of it. You're more, I guess, prompt to take care of that. You have pride in it. So we have these people at the table, making these decisions, not saying, oh, well, I think this is good for West Louisville, or I think, we should do this, but actually having the community come to the table, and the community, that representation is important. So I think investment, trust, and representation is what we lack and what needs to be amended.
Thanks, Jailen, for sharing. And I think one thing that you said really stuck out to me is that certain ways that we believe we are giving voice to community, oftentimes just a check the box mechanism, right? Well, we held a forum, so we let some people from the community speak, we let some young people speak. So clearly we've given them voice, and so we can move on. But clearly we have to allow community, we have to allow these marginalized voices to really have a opportunity to be in a position of power, right? So not just speaking if nobody's going to actually do anything with the words being said, right? What ways are we leveraging power so that we are creating an equitable experience for everybody? So I think that's really important. I'm glad you lifted that up. Imani.
Yeah, so I know that I can speak specifically from my experience with being on like the Civilian Review Board work group last year. What's missing from, whether it's our current understanding of how, public safety and community work, what it needs to be, I think that the biggest thing that everyone got from last year, whether you were in the work group or whether you were in the streets protesting or whether you were just a citizen at home watching the news, was the lack of transparency with these police departments. I think that we really need to, and I'm going to continuously use that word of reimagining of what does autonomous safety for each community look like? What does a world without, surveillance as policing? What does really looking at, and I want to lift this up from what Kenneth said, really looking at the root causes, what are a lot of the systematic issues with policing that really create that gap between the East and the West End of Louisville. And really just, again, centering youth voice in the midst of that, centering youth in each community, in each neighborhood, centering with their feedback, what they envision as what is a safe world for them to grow up in, what does that look like? And I think that Jailen had it right in that doesn't just show up in having community town halls and public forums, but that looks like having participatory budgeting. That looks like, really allowing youth to have some sort of say in being at those tables and saying, this is my experience. And these are the biases that we know that you all have. These are the biases that even with me coming from whatever part of town that I have about you. It's not just, kumbaya language. It is, how can we hold you accountable? And how can we shift dollars around to make ourselves safe? So I think that's the majority of it. I think that as we're reimagining, we're going to run into more questions, but we'll find more answers along the way too.
Thank you, Imani. So my next question, and realizing where we sit at as a city in Louisville, when we've had, the murder of Breonna Taylor occur in our city, and also David McAtee in the last 20 months or so, has put Louisville really center stage in this conversation around police brutality and racial justice and political liberation, right? And just knowing you all on a personal level, seeing you all really come into your own leadership through your protest and through your activation in the midst of all of this. I just want to know, how has that shaped you? How has that shaped your understanding of public safety? Has it changed anything? Just how has this experience living here or being in Louisville during this time really shaped your perception of public safety? And I'll start with Jailen this time.
Yeah, definitely. Such a tough topic and conversation to have, just reliving 2020 in Louisville. It was the epicenter of the racial uprising, as we all know. Just being a young person out there, being able to understand, for me, the power that people have to shift change in a community, seeing so many people from all walks of life and backgrounds unite in downtown Louisville. It was just, to this day, just probably one of the best experiences that I'll ever experience in life. But ultimately, I was able to understand as a 21-year-old the power that my ancestors have to keep pushing, to keep moving, to fight for social justice, to stand up, to be ultimately on the right side of history. And when we talk about public safety, we all understand, I guess, how Breonna Taylor was murdered, how David McAtee was murdered. But for me, it was more so understanding, how can we prevent this? How do we change this from a structural perspective? Where in policy, what does this look like? Because, still to this day, Black people are dying on the hands of police brutality. That's something that's been continuing since before my time. It's going to continue without structural policy in place. So ultimately for me, it was like, yeah, we march, yeah, we protest, but I was more so on the approach of, how do we lobby? How do we get legislation centered around this to protect people? So I guess what I'm saying is, last year really allowed me to understand the power that we have as young people and just as people in general, and the power that we have to stand up and really create the legislation that we want to see.
Thanks, Jailen. Imani?
I love all the upliftment this morning. But I don't think that I can really answer that that question without calling attention to a lot of the trauma that a lot of youth activists had to deal with and are still dealing with a lot of the stuff that happened in 2020. I think that for a lot of activists, a lot of them who are actually on this call, who are adults, they came into this movement already kind of having networks established. They came into the movement last year and everything that just happened with all those deaths, already understanding kind of what was the lay of the land. But from a youth perspective, if I am speaking honestly, if I am speaking in total truth, a lot of us incurred a lot of trauma from marching, from organizing, from just being out in the field of trying to navigate this entire system. Because even though we came in with our own understandings of what policing and what violence looks like, no, I don't think, if I'm speaking honestly, none of us were prepared for what we were hit with when it came to LMPD. And that's just me speaking honestly. I specifically remember there was a march, I think, to commemorate Mike Brown Day of last year. And we had gone out there with a specific purpose, with a specific understanding of who we were commemorating and what we were trying to do. But by the end of the protest, you had these youth organizers that were being followed by National Guardsmen. And I don't think that that for anyone is the city and I don't think that that is, patriotically speaking, the America that you really want to be living in. That, you know, youth activists who really feel called to share their voice, to share their experience, and even whether you see protesting as just letting go and being out in the street, or whether you see it as an act of being morally called to a purpose, it's still traumatizing to hold that memory, even as a young person. And I'm only 20 years old this year. That's a memory that, for me personally, I will carry with myself for the rest of my life, because that shows the danger of activism even right now. So I wanted to center that and make that clear, that a lot of people, a lot of young people, specifically in this state, I know it's around the nation, but specifically in this state, we're being hit with all of those issues of still dealing with the inheritance of a racist system and still trying to forge a path out of it. Yes, I think a lot of us, speaking for myself, we found a lot of purpose from last year. We found a lot of high moments of building community and of seeing where we can take it. But that trauma and that consistent healing that we as youth activists must do, whether we were on the ground or whether we were just handling logistics, and even for community-wise. I know that a lot of the activists that are on the call, there were a circulation of conversations that were happening last year of really trying to make sure that our communities were good at the end of the day, trying to make sure that, you know, our storefronts, that our houses, that they were taken care of, that they weren't taken, that they didn't have to take the brunt of all the violence that still was happening in Louisville, even at that conjunction of that time. I think that policy-wise, for a lot of youth activists, last year did confirm for us a lot of the lack of transparency, a lot of the lay of the land as it comes to LMPD, when we talk about group cohesion, when we talk about group mentality, when we talk about just the dangerous disconnect between LMPD and the community that it serves. But I think that for us as youth activists, and then for everyone on the call, and for everyone that is not even in Louisville, but trickled throughout the state, still dealing with what policing and what public safety looks like. It is that thing of us having to continually learn about what is possible, what is tangible for right now, but then working on what are those next steps. So yeah.
Thank you, Imani. Kenneth?
Yes, and so I agree with everything Jailen and Imani both said. For me, again, I just getting in this work, it really triggered me, specifically the Breonna Taylor situation, because it was here in Louisville, Kentucky. She's the same age as me. And then unfortunately, and I don't mean any disrespect, but it's almost like it was just, okay, they decided to pick her out of the hat this day. It again made me realize that these structures have to be reconstructed. You know, we have to get people like us in there, people that look like us, that have lived experience, that want to see change. I'm sorry, thinking about this is really triggering. I honestly just really embarrassed by the way the city of Louisville handled that. The distrust with the police on my end, of course, grew. It again just reconfirmed for me how much my life doesn't matter to the same people that are supposed to protect and serve me. Which again, there's nothing that when during these protests, yes, it feels good that you have your white brothers and sisters next to you. It's great. All of that is great. Don't get me wrong. but we have to lay down at night and understand it's, I don't know if I'll do this tomorrow, you know, and it's not fair. It's not fair that during these protests we're labeled when we're hurt. And don't get me wrong, do I agree with the riots and this and that? No, but do I agree with you murdering a young woman? No. So I don't feel like it's appropriate for people to tell us how to react after being hurt in such a way that they couldn't even imagine. And so again, for me, it's just, it was blatant what they see, what they feel about us, the narratives that they try to paint. Again, when a college team goes and wins a championship and they flip cars and set stuff on fire, it's a celebration. It's so you know, it really let me know just how far we need to go still. And again, these systems and these structures are very, very strong, and they're doing exactly what they were put in place to do. And I think that was the scariest thing for me, to understand that a woman was murdered, and yet it's not as simple as a woman was murdered. So, you know, for me, it was very, very traumatizing, but at the same time, it motivated me to continue to do what I do and being a fearless leader, and understanding that I need to be more on the front line. And so, you know, with fear comes action, and that's kind of how I move. There are a lot of things that I've been afraid of in life, but when you move and you just move, you would get past it. So again, wish I had a better response, but mainly it's just really, really triggering, and no one can understand what I mean by that other than young Black people. And I will ask that our white allies and other, you know, allies continue to support us, but at the same time, we carry so much more, and we need the support of the community, of these organizations. We just need support. It's not easy for us out here. And when, again, you see videos every day or every other week or whatever it is of people that look just like you being murdered, like you're, you know, like somebody's shooting birds out of the sky or something, it tends to, you know, almost make you go insane, you know. But this work is what keeps me grounded, keeps me centered. So hopefully my nephew, my little brother, they don't have to go through this same stuff and you know, have these same feelings. So yeah, that's my.
So appreciate that, Kenneth. And I think it's important for all of us to realize that this work is not easy. And there is a very real toll for the people who are fighting for liberation, right? It's not something that you just do and then take off. And so I think for all of our panelists, I think it's very important to understand the raw emotion that they're feeling right now. And for those who have been in that space, this is not just something that comes easy, but this is something that takes its toll and weighs on you heavily. I really want to, and I really wish we could have this conversation for more than the time we have. I think it's just so critical and so important. So hopefully this conversation will live in other spaces. My last question before we try to take one or two from the audience, and I think, you know, I heard Kenneth and Imani really lay into this, just support. And my last question is, what went right for you in terms of, you know, adult support in this movement building, and then what was lacking, right? We talked about you know, young people entering the space and giving voice and giving opportunities to lead. As we really look to really transform this dynamic and really make sure we're not talking about a hierarchical structure, and really getting not only young people, but really just marginalized people in positions of power. What went well for you all for that to happen? And then what still needs to happen so that we can make sure we're not just giving check the box type experiences to folks, or we're not just being patronizing and, oh, you speak so well, or, oh, that was so moving, but what do we really do to actually empower those folks? And I'll start with Jailen on this one.
Yeah, definitely. I'll start with what went well. I think the opportunity to heal was provided. That's so important within doing this work. Conversations, I know after protest, after events, a lot of times you, Darryl, yourself, several other people that work with us in the city, a lot of times would just call or text. It's like, hey, let's get together. Let's talk about this, what worked, what didn't work. So just providing that opportunity, that space, and it being authentic. I think when you work with young people, you have to be consistent. Consistency is important just because, so much happens. There's so much inconsistency embedded in our education system that, young people lack it, or, coming from home. So that consistency definitely worked. But I think a lot of times, sometimes you just bring young people. It's like, oh, you guys inspired me. You uplifted me. I feel motivated. Then the next day, there's no action items. It's like, well, what was that for? We live in the moment, we appreciate it, but what are we doing after this conversation? Just with this meeting, you have 3 young people sharing their truth, but tomorrow when we wake up, what do? We can't just continue our regular lives. We have to have action items within doing this work. How are we going to push this generation forward? So I think that's my 2 things. And then funding. With nonprofits specifically, there has to be funding for young people. You have to, if you're going to have young people at the table and have these conversations, specifically in Louisville, you have to have funding, or you're going to lose them. You're going to lose them. So certainly just those 3 things I think is imperative within doing this work, specifically with young people.
Thanks, Jailen. Kenneth?
Yeah, so Jailen kind of took some of the thoughts out of my head, but it's okay. I agree with what Jailen said, so I won't be as long-winded, but I just believe they need a standing presence. Again, like Jailen said, this is great that we're on this call, me, Jailen, and Imani, but what does tomorrow look like? How do we build off this? I just, again, think it's just really important consistency, for the young people to continue to be elevated, be highlighted. I think that a conversation once every month or every couple months is great. Any opportunity for us to be in the space is great, but it would be even better if it was, hey, twice a month, or just when you're in someone's face. I think that has a great effect on whatever it is you're trying to, whatever the cause is. So again, I think the consistency, and when we show up, to put us at tables that make sense. Again, it's great to share experience, thoughts, things like that, but our voices really do matter, and they are powerful. And I think that, the same, I can use me as an example, the same spaces that Anthony's in have Ken in there, have his voice heard. So again, I think that that's just really important. And speaking of Anthony, I think it's important that you have leaders like an Anthony Smith who don't just talk the talk, but they walk the walk. Everything that Anthony has committed on his end for me, he's held up. I wouldn't be in this seat if it was not for him. And that wasn't given to me. He gave me the opportunity to showcase my talents and to advance. So again, I think thoughtful leadership is very, very important. Fearless leadership, because Anthony is also someone who, when it comes to reimagining this whole thing, that's what he's all about. And he has no apologetic bone in his body when it comes to articulating that in any space. And I know that when it comes to me, he will back me in that way. So again, I think that's just very important. And I'll stop.
Thank you so very much, Kenneth, for that. And I also have to give a big shout out to Anthony. I think we all, the panelists could say how pivotal Anthony's been, not only for us, but in moving this work forward. Imani.
Right. I think I'm gonna do as Kenneth and Jailen did in starting off with what's right. I never really got to thank you, Darryl, and specifically, and Miriam for, a lot of the help that you all really did provide to young people in the movement spaces last year. Trying to get 20, 30 plus youth in one space is already really, it's already a lot to do, but really emphasizing that we are coming into those spaces our fullest selves, prioritizing, that we're feeling okay, that the topics that we're discussing are productive, and that we can, have next steps out of them. Really thank you for always doing that and for always being a support system. I think that for as far as, a lot of other adults, whether you be in Louisville or whether you be in other places, intentionally centering youth perspective, as Miriam, Ahmed, and Darryl did. I like to call you all the light bringers, because you all bring a lot of your own perspectives and a lot of your own education and your own understandings of the systems that we're dealing with. And that helps illuminate young minds into really being able to see the world clearly. Young people already come into these spaces, already come to these issues with our own understandings from what we have experienced. And even with what we want to see, having those clear eyes, but really tempering kind of those perspectives and helping us to see what we can do next. I agree with Jailen that a lot of y'all are kind of older adults, but you're still like in your 20s, 30s. I'm speaking to Colonel Young specifically. That you all really kind of got young people, especially last year, through all the things that we were going through, whether it be coming into organizing, whether it be with dealing with even group politics of organizing in a community. You all really helped us to kind of see beyond that, to really see kind of over the mountain, to really see what the purpose was, why everyone was in this space, how organizing spaces really belong to everyone. So again, I thank you for that, and for always intentionally saying, this is y'all's space, giving us our autonomy, saying, your perspectives matter just as much as ours. That's what makes you all light bringers to me. I don't want to be the bearer of negativity at 9:45 in the morning, but I think that things that still need to be worked on specifically for Louisville is for adults that are supporting youth. It is vital for you all to recognize maybe some of the social problems that are happening within these spaces, whether it be your own, whether it be, if you see on a grand scale collectively, even just of how people treat each other. And really making sure that the next generations don't take that on, that the next generations move intentionally, and that we move to create a community that is a beloved community, that centers diversity, that centers people being able to bring their fullest selves, their own perspectives, even their traumas too, into those spaces, but equally. I'll speak honestly, because if I don't, then that might do something to my own soul. There is still an issue in Louisville with whose voices we still do center, gender-wise. There needs to be an upliftment of listening to femme and trans voices, because folks who don't identify as cishet males, they're not always listened to. They're not always given the opportunities to be seen as charismatic, to be seen as they understand, how all the world works. They aren't seen as holding a lot of power, but they do. It's important for us to move forward and to understand that everyone's perspective is important, that it's not just, who prescribes to what identities. There is intersectionality in healing, there's intersectionality in liberation, because and I'm quoting Reverend Dr. King again, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I think that really connecting to what youth prioritize, what our perspective is, it is obviously essential to all of that. Gen Z, we're coming up in a world in which we are constantly hearing about this deal of racism that we are still holding on our backs, that is still, weighing down communities disproportionately, that we're also still dealing with a lot of global issues, like global climate issues. We're caught in a perspective that everything is urgent, but that everything needs to be supported, especially youth infrastructure networks. And that's my next and final point. I'm sorry, I'm acting like my father, who was a Baptist preacher. I will come to a close very soon. I think that Jailen and Kenneth had it right, that funding and educational programming for youth and making that consistent, making that a mainstay for youth, especially youth coming into the movement who are dedicating their lives to the moral, call to be activists. That's important because whether it be my generation or the generations that come after, there has to be youth infrastructure in place to let young people be able to organize together. It should not be that there be youth organizations over here, over there, all throughout the state that don't even know each other. There is so much intersectionality in Kentucky that is needed to be connected. There needs to be a youth network that really shows, a youth from Hopkinsville, a youth from Appalachia, a youth from, Prospect, a youth from the west end of Louisville, show those intersectionalities, show how they can work together, show, what are the common goals, where are the common grounds for each of those youth. And that comes from support from adults, that comes from support from people who have been in this longer than we have. For historical purposes, think of SNCC and Ella Baker. She was there right from the beginning, telling them, you all need to have a youth network that is autonomous. It doesn't need to be a part of the SCLC. It needs to be your own, because you all are powerful. Be the Ella Bakers. Yeah, that's my answer. I will come to a close.
So thank you, Imani, for that. We do have some questions for the chat, and I'm going to try to direct these because I don't know how much time we got, but I'm going to try to direct these to folks, and then or try to make sure we get to hear everybody, but get to as many as possible. I also will say I'm gonna call the audience out because the youth said they need more than just this conversation, and I'm just looking at the chat. I see some faith leaders. I see some folks with a lot of money. I see some foundations. I see some researchers. So all of y'all should be reaching out to these young people and asking how you can support. I will say and put my commitment that the Coalition of Supporting Young Adults would love to help build that infrastructure for a youth network. So Imani, let's talk offline, Kenneth and Jailen, but that's me putting my skin in the game to help y'all out. I want to know, because a lot of people are asking, what specifically do you all want to see funded? And for the sake of time, I'm going to ask you all just to give me one thing or one priority area that you all would like to see funded, or an issue that you think needs to be lifted up. Kenneth.
For me, I would say mentorship. A lot of the times, well, based off of my experience, mentorship is what changed the course of my life. The mentor that I had, there were things that I could share with them that I may have not been comfortable sharing with another adult. There were times that I just needed a push, just needed someone to help me see that next step. So again, I believe that the right mentors can change the course of a young person's life. As long as that mentor sees this as bigger than themselves, it's important to not have any, motive or any kind of thought of anything returning to you, but just understanding that you changing this young person's life changes the next person's life, and so on. So that's what I would find.
All right, thank you, Kenneth. Jailen.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Kenneth. Mentorship is so important. The mentors that I have, just amazing. Talk to them often, and it's important. it's extremely important to have mentors in your life who shape and help mold you. But specifically, I think, having funding toward programming in terms of learning about the root causes, as I mentioned, working with Youth Violence Prevention Research Center there, that program really just shaped my life. At 16, I was hired to work with them and learn about systemic racism and structural racism and root causes. When you think of a 16-year-old, they're frying burgers at McDonald's or trying to figure out what their next step is. And at that age, that's an opportunity that was provided and always going to be grateful for. But as I mentioned, there was funding in order to do that. So certainly programs like that to just educate young Black males and young Black women on why this issue is happening and instilling in them the power that they have. Because when that was instilled into me by mentors, the sky was the limit and continues to be that.
All right, thank you. So we got mentoring, YVPRC, shout out to the YVPRC team. I see soon to be Dr. Trinidad Jackson on the call. So shout out to him and the work that team is doing. Imani.
So I actually think that education really needs to be funded. I'm not just talking about formal education, being a center student. I'm not just talking about, going through the educational system. I also mean creating spaces, and for some, I know that this was thrown around as an idea last year, but if anyone wants to pick it up, power to you. Having community-centered education houses, really allowing, there to be in those houses, allowing there to be, pedagogy libraries that center BIPOC authors, that bring in, academics, BIPOC academics that really can speak to holistic truths of history, and that can, mold and enlighten young minds as to what already happened, even just what happened in social movements, so that we can, begin to proactively think about what needs to come next. In the same vein of me saying that, and I'll try to keep it as short as I can because I am a rambler, in funding education, making sure that it is intentional to reshape academia. Academia as it exists is, even though it is changing, it is still very Eurocentric. So really investing in, how do we teach young BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color minds into, looking at, what skills do they have? What do they know already? How can they provide for themselves? But then also, feeding them into, what is this system, like Jailen said, helping them to understand what research and what policies look like. I'll tell you this, a lot of young people that came into the movement last year, we had to look at the budget, the city budget for the first time, and we were all just kind of shocked at how much we had to go through. So really funding education.
All right. Thank you guys so very much. So I am glad that we are flexible and adaptable in the space. I think we had a pivot to another activity, but just talking to some of the organizers, I think this has been a really great conversation. I unfortunately have to go at 10, but I really hope folks, because I know we have a lot of questions in the chat, so I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. But again, I really want to just thank Kenneth and Jailen and Imani for really doing this work and doing it authentically and doing it well, right? And for being an example, not only to young people, but to us older folks as well. And I just want to echo what you all said again, is that it's not enough for us to invite young people to a space and clap and affirm. It's definitely necessary, but real progress is bringing them to the table, continuing these conversations, implementing what they're saying into actual dollars, policy, and initiatives. So I want to thank them for their time. And I want to just say, although I have to leave now, myself and the Coalition Supporting Young Adults, CSYA, is committed to not only continuing the conversation, but figuring out how we can support. So thank you all so very much.
And thank you, Darryl. You did an outstanding job with this panel, and hope to definitely keep you plugged into the CAN work as it continues into next year. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ashley Parrott. I'm one of the CAN co-hosts for this setup here, and I'm also connected to CNPE. I'm the vice chair of the board, but you know, first of all, the panel did an outstanding job, and I'm just you know, there are a couple of things that resonated with me. And then I want to just, instead of doing our small group breakouts, I'd like to continue the conversation here in this large group setting because there's just so many reflections that I think we all need to hear together. You know, a couple of things that stood out to me, Kenneth, is when you talked about the trauma side of this. There was trauma everywhere. I felt like during this past year, and people still dealing with it today. And so, you know, that was one thing that resonated with me is, you know, dealing with the trauma that you experience, but then what does that turn into? Do you use the trauma to stop the work and say, I'm done, or, you know, say that, you know, I've done enough and I can't do more, or do you use it to continue to move yourself and the work forward to continue to make change? And that's the hard part, because you know, when you have that trauma that's so heavy and sometimes debilitating, it's like, where's your space to heal? Where's that time for you to heal? Because you're still a human being, and you know, we don't operate as robots. You know, everybody needs that space to heal. So that's one question I would love to kind of kick off, is just talking about the healing piece. How do you continue to move forward while dealing with the need to heal yourself? Repeatedly, almost daily, if not minute by minute, in order to be okay to do the work. Something else that resonated with me was, so much, but Imani, I think you talked about speaking your truth. You said, I have to speak my truth or it will harm my soul. Something along those lines, but it's just like, that is incredibly powerful, because sometimes speaking your truth can be excruciating. It can be painful. And it's uncomfortable sometimes. And that's something I struggle with. And it's like, but how do you use it to as a part of healing your soul? And so I think that was powerful. And then one other thing is somebody, Jailen, I don't know if it was you or Kenneth, maybe Jailen, talked about legislation and how, you know, you push to change policy. You have to push against the system that's already broken. But the challenge there is there are people within the system who don't care. And that's just how it is. They don't care, or they don't get it, and they don't want to be educated around it. So obviously there's a need to look at the system itself and push against the, you know, changing policy, but also think about who's in those seats. And so who's in those seats matters. And obviously that's why we need to encourage more people who get it to run for office, which is, you know, a challenge in itself. So but with that, you know, I'd love to keep the conversation going here. And if anybody wants to jump in with questions, just raise your hand or put something in the chat and we'll call you out so you can speak your question. But let's start with the conversation around healing. What did you all do, panelists, to deal with the trauma on a daily basis, and to make sure that you were also paying attention to your own needs and the care that you needed to be okay? And I know that was probably a struggle, but can you talk a little bit about that piece? Anyway, this is a free for all, so just jump on in.
I'll start us off. I know my way of dealing with it was sort of simple, because as I said, this has kind of been my experience in life, dealing with trauma and being resilient. And just, you know, chin up, chest out. That was kind of my motto. So I just, you know, I believe in my grandmother's prayers, my mother's prayers, just asking my family to constantly pray for me, asking friends, you know, to just check on me. Just if it's, hey, how you doing, man? Just give me a quick call or text. You know, you begin to look into things that you can do to heal yourself. So I've gotten into meditation and yoga, things like that, work out daily. So just trying to continue to build my mind, my body, and my spirit daily, however that looks. I show up better some days than others, but you know, the work's heavy. I'm a person, but I just give it my all. It's kind of hard to you don't really heal from all of this stuff. You kind of bury it, you don't really heal. But I've been doing a good job of just letting myself feel those emotions and using those emotions and channeling them in my work and in different things that that I'm passionate about. So
Yeah, I really want to uplift what you said, Kenneth, about even just leaning on, the prayers of like those around you. So like I mentioned, my father was a Baptist minister, so that is great with me. I know that in my own personal experience, last year to this moment, it was the trauma of organizing. It was, being introduced into that entire network of organizing and movement spaces and of trying to deal with, each soul, each person that was in those spaces. But then by the end of the year, it was, me having to look inward and deal with, my father's sudden passing from COVID. So after that, coming right after December when he passed, it was an entire moment of trying to understand, okay, this is everything that I've done and dealt with up to this point. I need to make sure that I'm good, especially as a Black femme in these spaces, whether it is going back to a predominantly white school in the rural part of Kentucky, or whether it's even just coming back into, organizing spaces where everyone's dealing with something. It's really boiled down to always doing those check-ins with folks every day, checking in with myself, even more so to really assess, okay, how is what I did today in alignment with the purpose of where I know we need to go as a community, where I know throughout the narrative of Black people in this nation, on this land, and of all oppressed people on this land, is what I did today feeding that progress. And even in the vein of saying that not every day has to feed that progress, because me just showing up to those spaces, me just existing, that's good enough too. So even if it's like using methods like journaling, or whether it is, trying to see the intersection of faith and kind of the moral capacity that comes with being an activist, with being an advocate of self-reflection, of, being able to envision a better future, to be able to envision a better system and how that shows up for everyone. That for me is in a way healing, even coming off of, personal tragedies or problems that were already existing there.
Thank you, Imani, for sharing that. I'm also sorry for your loss. And I just want to say that, so you have these young leaders who are out in the streets fighting, fighting for change, but also still dealing with their personal life, personal lives, just like each and every one of us. And to think that, a lot of people approach equity and race conversations, and I always say it like scientifically, like, oh, well, it's really interesting, like a study. No, we're talking about real people who have real lives, who have a passion for change, or passion for improving their community, and dedicating their lives to that, despite everything else they have going on in the background. So just remember that. Jailen, I'm gonna give you an opportunity. We have some people that have their hands raised that I wanna get in here. So Linda, I'm looking at you. So I'm gonna have you jump in after Jailen.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be very brief, but, just giving people their flowers while they can smell them. Imani, just a brilliant young person doing amazing work, and just seeing her be so strong within losing her father, working with her as a fellow young person was just impressive. And as you said, Ashley, young people go through real world problems just like adults. But I think for me, it was centering yourself around like-minded people, having those conversations with people that are just going to listen. I mean, it could be silly stuff. Let's go jump rope in the Ohio River. Not saying like it's a bad or good idea, but well, maybe if you start on the edge of the river first, just someone that's going to listen to you and give you a suggestion versus, just saying, no, don't do this. And during that movement, a lot of times, there were silly things and ideas that would come to, spark a revolution. But, within that, it was just an understanding, a mutual understanding. So I would certainly say surrounding yourself around like-minded people helped and continues to help.
It's very good. Linda, I'm going to kick it to you to ask a question. And Trinidad, you're on deck.
Okay, I appreciate that, Ashley. I just want to say thank you. We spent an hour getting the gifts from Imani, Kenneth, and Jailen, of transparent feelings, of real ideas. And I want to express my appreciation. But I also heard a couple of things related to action items and mentorship. And so I wanted to underline that and ask if you can, if you want to. You've got all these people on the call who have power and leadership and who may not be people of color. And part of what I think I heard is that youth need to be brought permanently, I'm going to add that word, to the table consistently, permanently, and people have to get out of their way. And the funding has to be there. And some of us gray hair types or activists have to get out of the way, but be there to support. So where would you, if you could, want to make those entries first in the structure? I mean, if that makes sense, where do you need to be now? Or where would you want to be now first? And where do you think that's going to make a difference?
Kenneth, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so I guess so the question is just what would you do first? Okay, so for me, I'm big on self-care. So I would say the first thing we need to do is prioritize the mental health. I just believe that how can I say this? A lot of these people don't have what they need literally. You could say for a lot of people haven't had a meal, so you can't expect someone to be in their right mind. Again, we need to just evaluate the young people, the people in these communities, to just see what is going on, what is the problem. Again, you need to, when you unpack all your trauma and you deal with you first, you can then begin to walk, in your true form and can, be a thriving member of the community. So I just believe that it's really important, focus on the mental health aspect first.
Okay, I'll any other panelists want to respond to that? And then I'll kick it over to Trinidad. I think he had his hand raised. Okay, all right. Thank you, Linda, for jumping in on that. We do have a lot of people here who are wondering, you talked about some of the programs or some of the big picture areas where there's investment opportunities, and that you do have some funders on the call who are trying to wrap their heads around where are those concrete, program opportunities that, we should be paying attention to. You said mentoring, education. We do have big brothers, big sisters on the call who, they do a lot of the one-to-one mentoring and are looking to expand that, investment in youth. But are there specific programs out there that are getting it right, but they just don't have the resources or the funding or capacity to have a greater impact? And so that I'm opening that question to the panel, but also just to the group, everybody on the call, if there's some programs that we should be looking at. Sorry, and then Trinidad, you can jump in too. I didn't mean to cut you off, sorry.
And I'll be really, really fast with this answer. And this is just a program that I came from, the Thrive Fellowship. I believe that the issue may be funding. I'm not sure, I don't want to speak on too much that I don't know about. I just know that the goal was to affect a young Black man's life and get him on a thriving path, and that's what they did with me. That's what they did with another former fellow, Dorian Woodard. So again, I don't know how we're judging it based off of percentage or what number system they're using, but I know that my life changed and a lot of people around me have benefited from that. So I know that the program is needed. And I believe with me being a former fellow, there are a lot of feedback, just different ideas that I could give them to maybe push the program forward. So if there is anybody out there that want to potentially partner with funding that and getting that back up off the ground, please do, because there are Black men and boys that are dying that need a program that'll help redirect their life.
Sorry, I'm getting other questions. Any other, okay, Jailen, I see you came off the chat.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm a journalist at heart, and Steve Hartman, he's a reporter with CBS. He did a story recently. I encourage everyone to check it out. It's called Dads on Duty. Essentially, this school in Louisiana, one day there was 23 kids that got suspended from fighting. And the district came together and essentially it was like, we have to create something to stop the suspensions. And these dads, about 40 dads, they're in the schools every day, and suspension rates have dropped, fighting has dropped. So it's just like, how can we remodel this in Louisville with Jefferson County and funding and get dads on hand? And I think of, the young kid that died on the bus stop in Louisville, seeing parents and dads on the bus stop. So I just think, how can we take that and rechange it to benefit Jefferson County and just Kentucky in general? I think some funding behind that, if we get some people at the table, that would be a brilliant idea. And check that story out. It's Steve Hartman on the right. Great read.
Great, thank you. Trinidad, if you're still on, do you want to go ahead and jump in with a question or comment? Okay, he may have had to hop off. All right. All right, anybody else have any questions or comments?
Sorry. I was just going to assert this with the last question, because I think that Kenneth really got it when he talked about the Thrive Fellowship. As far as youth activism, like around Kentucky, I know that specifically at a lot of schools, there are a lot of, and I know that we were asking specifically about like foundations and organizations, but I know that there are a lot of like grassroots youth organizing that are happening at these colleges. If I didn't lift this up, I would probably kick myself later. Here at Center right now, there's a group of young people that have been trying for about the last year, past last year, to just try to get this Confederate statue down that's located right next to the campus. This group of students, they've been tossed between conversations with the church that owns the land which the statue is placed on, and the college administration, hearing, that each side really wants to work, but it is still an issue of really needing to put attention on this issue and how it affects a lot of students throughout the state. At other colleges, each college has groups of students that are trying to tackle their own issues, whether it be food justice or support for the homeless, but really centering even just the grassroots organizing that is happening around the state, whether it be on campuses or whether it just be in communities of youth building. Last year, and I'm sorry I keep coughing, that's probably annoying, myself and in a group of youth activists, we founded an organization called the Youth Resistance Collective. We're still trying to build that out, still trying to push that philosophy that youth around the state and youth in Louisville need a support system, that they need to support each other, that they need that network. So really intentionally turning your eyes to looking at what youth themselves are doing. That's important.
Thank you for that. Matthew, just before I turn it to you for your question, one thing I want the full group to think about too is, and our panelists reference this, is when you bring youth or people into the room to give really solid information, and then you leave the meeting and nothing happens. And so one thing we've been thinking about as a part of this CAN network is what does action look like for this group? This year has really been focused on understanding the landscape and information sharing and connections between individuals like yourselves and all that. But we're thinking about, okay, we've got a lot of great information. We need to keep that flow going, but now we need to pivot to what does action look like? And so Matthew, I'm going to turn it to you to ask your question. I don't know if I took away from you on that, but I would love to hear from the group, what does action look like in supporting youth doing this work, but particularly around this public safety issue for CAN. Matthew, I'm going to turn it to you now.
Thanks. Perfect lead in. So I'm a white pastor of a predominantly white congregation in downtown Louisville with almost no youth. So my natural overlaps with the areas in which you all are doing your work are limited. But I know that there are people in the church who are consistently asking, what is some way that we can get engaged and support work for our Black neighbors here in Louisville. And so, just trying to find a way not to do this in a way that plays into white savior narratives, not to do this in a ways that comes in and stomps on the work that y'all are doing, but realizing that we don't have a ton of funding, we don't have any youth, and we are mostly white people. So just I would love for you all to give me an action item that I could just take to our leadership team and put in front of them and say, this is what we've been asked for, what can we do? So I hate to also put on you all the impetus for giving me my marching orders, right? But just want to give you the opportunity if that's something y'all want.
So I'm speaking as a pastor's daughter, and I'm sorry if anyone else wanted to hop in, but since it's a shared experience, speaking as a pastor's daughter, I have, and I might be actually wrong about this, but I know that most denominations out of state, but specifically in Kentucky, have their own association. So General Baptist of Kentucky, they have their association. There's a central district. And again, I might be wrong about this. I don't know if there is one that brings together white and Black churches to really just talk specifically just about social issues. There might have been some initiatives in the past, but being the daughter of a pastor and the cousin of a few pastors, I think that is really important. Just putting together sort of a network between those churches to where there's resource sharing. I know that during COVID, and I kind of attribute this to maybe even how my father caught COVID, was just because there wasn't enough resources, even for Black churches that were struggling, to be able to keep their doors open, to be able to have programming, if it's for youth, to be able to, do all the things to help build and grow out the mission. Resource sharing and holding those social spaces for Black pastors and any, BIPOC pastors and white pastors to really just convene and talk and, share each other's stories and all of that. I think that may be not a silver bullet, but maybe a good place to start.
Thank you, Imani. I'm gonna let, we're getting close to time, and I want to get to the action question too, outside of what Matthew raised. Kenneth, do you have thoughts about the question?
No, I was actually going to say, Imani, I agree with everything she said. I think that would be just a great first step, and you'll definitely be able to build off of that. I truly believe that.
Okay. This is also an opportunity to exchange information. So the conversation does not have to stop here. So if there are people you want to connect with after this, get their information in the chat, have conversations offline, and we can bring it back to the group too, because that's what this group is all about. I'm going to go back to the action question. As we think about CAN moving into 2022, and particularly around this public safety issue. What does action look like for the Community Activation Network? How would you all foresee that taking place after we've received all this really rich information this year? And I'm just opening it up to whoever wants to chime in from the group.
So my thoughts are, I need some time to think about that. I honestly, with me needing to think about that, I would just say, don't wait too long on the next step. Whatever this next, action step is, I would make sure and be intentional on just acting on that as quick as possible. Maybe after this, instead of, yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe Imani, if you have any thoughts, for me, I'm just trying to figure out what you can do. Again, I just know that a lot of the times after these conversations and after all this information is gathered, you're kind of left wondering, like, okay, well, what happened with all of that? So
Now what?
Maybe even if it's as simple as a follow-up debrief meeting to where we can brainstorm on the information received, and we can give people time to kind of have that, process it, think about it, and then have another meeting, and then we can determine what do we do? What are the action steps? That's just my thing. But I would be just real intentional on continuing the conversation. Momentum is when you have it, you want to take full advantage of it. And I think that this conversation has been a really, really powerful conversation. And I know that, again, I hope that I see Imani, and I know Jailen left, but I hope I see him very, very soon. So hopefully, we all figure out something and connect. I'm just not sure, honestly.
No, but you said something powerful. Don't wait till too long to take the next step. And I think all of us have that problem, is spinning and make sure we're taking the right next step. But sometimes you just got to move.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Because with this, I don't think you can have a defined next step. It moves daily as the things happen every day. So again, we know people can become busy. There are just so many different factors. I think it's just important for us to continue to move, continue to speak with one another, and have these collective ideas, things like that. So.
Okay. Well, we are just about at time. I'm getting a lot of good information in the chat, though, from Big Brothers, Big Sisters around the mentoring. That's obviously a clear takeaway. Matthew pointed out that we need some clear action steps coming out of what we've heard, and that hasn't really happened yet. People sharing information. So this has been great. I just want to thank the panelists for taking your time, which is incredibly precious, to be with us today and share your story and your truth. And so I've been incredibly moved today, but we all need to be moved towards action and not letting it sit somewhere on a shelf. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann. Ann, if you could close us out and talk about next steps from this meeting.
Sure. Well, first of all, Ashley, thank you again for stepping in this space. You do such a beautiful job, and I'm so appreciative of you being here. Also want to thank Imani and Jailen and Kenneth. Your words speak for themselves, and showing up this morning, and stay in touch with us if there are ways we can support you in this space and in our spaces outside of CAN. Please reach out. There's a lot of good information in the chat. As Ashley said, there's some recommended books: On the Run, Fugitive Life in American City was one, and then Trauma Stewardship, which really intrigues me, An Everyday Guide to Caring for Self While Caring for Others. That's probably a book we all ought to read. I think caring for self is very difficult, and Kenneth, I think it's it's beautiful that you're learning at such a young age how to do that, because that will sustain you in all the work that you do. So thank you for participating, everyone. I am a firm believer that being in this space and reaching out to one another and learning is action and necessary action. Relationships are critical in this space. And as we figure out and define what we mean by action, one of the things that we're exploring is there are already a lot of beautiful solutions out there. We've lifted some of them up the last 9 months. Big brothers, big sisters on the call, and there are others on the call that are solutions. And so we're talking about how do we emphasize that in early 2022? Is there a way that we can lift up the solutions and have people plug in? So it's like a plug-in event. So not recreating something, but making sure we really understand what's already happening and how we can support those efforts. So stay close. We hope you'll join us again in November, December as we lift up these other groups. And remember, in November, December, the meetings are a little earlier because of the holidays. So be sure to go to cmpe.org and sign up. And we wish you all health and peace for you and your loved ones. And be sure to take care of yourself and each other. And we hope to see you in the community and in November at the November CAN meeting. Take care.